Hi everyone, welcome back to Industry Week 2021. So as we mentioned before, if you want to put up any images or any kind of Industry Week related stuff, please use the hashtag IW21, and then automatically with that hashtag your post will be entered in to win a range of prizes. So this afternoon we've got Nick Carter joining us. Nick Carter is Head of Design at Candide, which is a Bristol-based startup for plant lovers. Nick studied graphic design at Nottingham Trent University and he graduated in 2010. He then went on to work as a freelancer and a senior designer at Spitfire Studio, where he worked with clients such as Warner Brothers, Disney and Google before joining Candide. So I'd like to welcome Nick today and say a big hello and a warm welcome from all of us. Some of the students are already saying hello as well, so thank you. Hi Nick, I will pass over to you.
Hi Lauren, thank you for inviting me today. It feels a bit weird, I'm not used to talking about myself in this way, so we'll see how this goes. I guess we kick straight off, is that?
Yeah, I think get started with your presentation and then we'll move to a Q&A after that. As always with the students, if you've got questions, please add them in to the chat and I'll feed them back to Nick once we get to the Q&A point.
Thank you. Right, here we go. So, as I mentioned, my name is Nick Carter and I work for a company called Candide. And who am I? Well, I live in a small town called Frome, which as you can see is about 3.5 hours away from Nottingham. I moved down here about 2.5 years ago. Frome's a really lovely little place. It's famous for having a lot of independent shops, despite being quite small, and it attracts a lot of like illustrators, designers, musicians. It's a very interesting place, but I work in Bristol, which is about an hour away. So, I mean, I love living in a city, and I lived in Nottingham for 11 years, and I never ever thought I would move down to the countryside, and this may become a little bit of a theme as I go through different things, but we never know what life's going to throw at us, what opportunities life presents us, and you know, this is one of the times where I decided to take the opportunity and move. So I'm head of design at Candide. Candide is we build products for plant lovers. So whether you've got a windowsill or a 2-acre garden, we want to help you grow something successfully. That covers quite a lot of things, from helping you buy plants to helping you care for them, for just being able to identify them. And you know, I've recently moved into this position. I was the first designer at Candide a couple of years ago, and you know, we've grown the team, but there's still only 5 of us. So if I was to talk about what it means to be a head of design, that's for the future. So I'm going to talk a little bit about where I've come from, the work that I've done in the past, and how I got to where I am today. And as we're talking about plants, here's some shots from my garden. Yeah, it's looking a bit rubbish at the minute because we're just about to go into spring, but my irises are out. You can see a picture from the summer where I've got all my my pond plants going, and I've got a lot of house plants. So you can see here, even though my bathroom's not decorated yet, I've still got some massive staghorn ferns in there, which is, you know, gives a bit of a rainforest vibe. So this is what Candide looked like just after I started. We're actually much bigger than this now. There are 70 people, I think. I did try and take a picture of everyone at the Google Meet on Monday, but you can't fit everyone on screen, and I don't know if they appreciated their Monday morning faces being shared with other people. So yeah, so how did I get here? If we start back to, I guess, when I was in your position, or maybe a year or two before, I never actually intended to go into design. I was doing art at uni, art at college, sixth form college. You know, I was doing a bit of graphical illustration, some mixed media work, and I was playing around with like Flash and web bits on the side, but it was like an interest. And, you know, a lot of our art teachers at school were very sort of traditional. You go and do a foundation, you go and do a fine art degree, then you find a career afterwards. So I wasn't really sure what was available. And actually, this is what I wanted to do. I applied to music college. I was going to be a singer, and it didn't pan out. I didn't get onto the course that I wanted to get to. And luckily, I'd applied to do a foundation, which I loved. But it's one of these things, when we're really dead set on something, I think our plans can blind us to not only our other skills, but the other opportunities that are available to us. So I was really dead set on this, and I was like, oh, wait, but I actually ended up here, which is Leeds College of Art and Design, which I think now is Leeds Arts University. It was a great place. I was sort of spent the first week drawing sticks in a room from 9 o'clock in the morning till 4 o'clock at night. I'm sure many of you who've done foundations may have done something similar. I could draw amazingly at the end of that. I can't draw anywhere near as well as that anymore. It's a skill, you have to keep it going. But it really opened my eyes to how big the creative industries were, all the different opportunities that are available to you, whether it's within different disciplines or even within design itself, like the different opportunities that are available to you there. And that's something that no one in my immediate life had ever really demonstrated to me. There is that common phrase, you can't be what you can't see. And if you don't know something's available, it takes you time to find out what that is and see it as a career path. But my next step, I ended up at NTU, as Lauren said, which was a great experience for me. I love living in Nottingham and being in the studio at NTU. We weren't actually in this building, we were in one across town, but it's all moved over to Waverley now. But I do think like something about doing this kind of looking through all your old work, retrospecting on things. I do wish when I was at uni, I'd taken advantage of the crits, the kind of open and varied, honest feedback that you get in those sessions with different people. It's very hard to maintain that kind of environment once you're in the world of work. Many people have got different schedules. Often designers work by themselves or not with other designers. It does depend on what part of the industry you're in, but it can be hard to maintain those kind of relationships and have that honest discussion about your work that takes time to build up. It's quite hard to do it with strangers. But after university, I ended up at a place called Spitfire, which was very formative for me. I was there for 8 years on and off. And I actually started there the day after graduation. Throughout this 8 years, we worked for Google, Warner Brothers, Disney, Clark's, M&S, as well as a lot of like smaller local businesses. But actually, getting the job here, there's often the phrase, you're often recommended to ring agencies or like to send a little gimmicky gift or something like that. I was very lucky. They were setting up the studio. I was walking past looking for a house to move into. That might become a bit of a theme as well. And I just saw they setting up, so I just knocked on and asked what they were doing and what kind of place it was. And they were like, "Oh, send over your portfolio and we'll have a chat about it." Now that was serendipity. And that conversation could have gone a million different ways. But because of that one short conversation, it shaped the next 8 years of my life. But also having been on the other side of it, they're not guaranteed. It's very lucky when something that happens. It is a serendipitous thing. It's not you're not guaranteed to get anything out of those kind of things. So you shouldn't dismiss those opportunities, but don't bank on them. I guess would be my advice there. So this is why I actually wanted to show a little snapshot of my work history. This is from LinkedIn, that dreaded place that's just full of people self-promoting. But it shows you a very linear progression, a very linear path of where my work life has gone. But actually what you don't see here is, the first 6 months at the beginning where I was working 3 nights a week at the bodega and I was doing freelance work and I was working 2 or 3 days at Spitfire. You don't see, or you see a little bit of, what happened? Why did I move back to Leeds in 2011? And we didn't get paid by a client. And that happened in a month where I had to move house. And when things like that happen, they have a real world consequence. I had to move home. I was very lucky that I could move home and I could continue my freelance work. A lot of people don't have that privilege. But it sort of derailed everything, and you start to consider, my career was on the right track, and then within 6 months, a year, it's completely changed. I'm back living at home. It makes you doubt things, but things did pick up, and I got back to where I wanted to be, and you just don't know when you're in those situations. So these things, I again retrospecting on when I was at university, people talking about their experience. Often it's about the successes, but there are struggles that people have. Even if you have a lot of lucky breaks, you have to work hard. And sometimes life will just throw things that you don't expect. I kind of, specifically thinking about the kind of talks like this that I used to go to at uni. There's a designer that I really admired. I love his work, but one thing he said was that you should never take on work that you don't believe in, and it's better for you to refuse that work than work on something that you don't genuinely believe in. And all I think back to now is there's a man who's never had to design a takeaway menu to pay his rent. It can be hard, and sometimes it's better to work on something that you don't believe in or that might be a little bit crap or rubbish, because it helps you like hone your skills. We're all going to make rubbish work at some point. We'll continue to do it no matter how skilled we get, and it's a constant process of learning and developing. So I want to move on to some of my work from my time at Spitfire. I don't know, some of you should recognise these two brands. They're local to Nottingham. DHP, which is a big promoter in the city and across the UK, and Alt Tickets, which is their ticketing brand. I worked on that as one of my last projects at Spitfire, I think, and it was I really enjoy working with DHP. They're a great client to work with, and it's nice to work on something that you see visibly in the city. Having moved to Bristol as well, 3-4 years later, seeing the DHP logo that I designed on flyers and posters just around the city catches you off guard a little bit, and that's a really nice little thing. Part of the reason I want to show this work is even when you have a project that you really like the client, you get on really well, you have a lot of development, sometimes things don't go the way that you would like. They either want something different to what you want to present, or maybe something takes a different route. And one thing that's really important with this kind of work is make sure that you've got stakeholders in the room. Sometimes when you work with a client, the person who's making the ultimate decision may not be involved in that process. And the earlier you can identify that kind of situation, it means that it saves a lot of time later on, because it means that you know who has to be communicated to, like if you're taking a big decision. So here's some of the development work that went into this project. And I'm not 100% sure what we were thinking at the time with the marbled ink and stuff like that. It seems a bit full on now, but you can see all the different routes that we explored. There's the sort of ambigram that references the earlier logo that we've done for DHP, so it can be viewed both ways and it reflects. There's just a hand rendered one. There's the serif Gothic execution, which harks back to the sort of the Rock City history of DHP without being explicitly about heavy metal or rock music. And then there's also like the execution revolving around festival flags and things like that, because they promote a lot of festivals. These all fell by the wayside, which is sad, but that's kind of what happens when you're working on commercial work. You don't always end up doing the route that you think personally might be the best. And another one in this vein, I worked for Denby for about 6 months, I think, and we launched their natural canvas range. Now, I love the range that this is based on, which is a beautiful, beautiful piece of pottery called Chevron. It's got a really nice matte glaze. I don't know if anyone likes ceramics, but it's really lovely, which was designed in the 60s by a woman named Jill Pemberton, and they were looking to relaunch it for a new generation, bring it slightly more up to date. It depends how successful they are. I don't know. But these examples here, these print executions, it was a very wide-ranging project. Like, we worked on a lot of film pieces and the website and branding bits, but I just wanted to show these two print executions because they involve some photography that we shot and that we loved the art direction of. Part of one of the original films that we did was presenting their work in a gallery format, and it was all tied together by this line, modern art inspired by a past master. And this was the real execution of showing you the direct link between these two. You've got two generations of women, and you've got the two generations of the products that maybe they've been bought as a gift for either their first house or maybe when they were for getting married. But it didn't, it didn't pan out. Like, some of the stuff went live and it was great and it felt really successful, but things like this fell by the wayside because they went in a different direction. And that can be really hard, but you still have the tokens or like the remnants of that. You have the designs, you can keep hold of them. If you're proud of that work, you can still show it and you can still talk about it. So another project that I worked on at Spitfire This was a really, really hard one. It was very, very in depth, but we, for the launch of Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, which must be 2015, 2016, I think, we created the world of Fantastic Beasts in Google Maps. This is something that I sort of project managed and art directed, and it was amazing what we achieved. I spent weeks sourcing imagery from the Library of Congress in America to try and how do we build these environments. And something that seemed ridiculous at the time is quite funny looking back, that we were asked to build these 3D worlds of a film we hadn't seen. And anytime we were sent screenshots of the film, because it was under embargo, it was all redacted. So you'd have all these big black boxes that like obscured the key features that we were trying to recreate. So it was quite a hard one, but it was great to get something like this out there into the world. It got a lot of press, and yeah, it was really satisfying to see this actually. At the time, you could go into Google Maps, and if you dropped your pin on the Woolworth building, which is what MACUSA was based on, you could actually go and explore all these different sets as part of promotion. So it's something I'm quite proud of, and I loved working on it. Another big project for us was this Disney project for Winnie the Pooh, and they were looking to re-engage audiences with Winnie the Pooh as a brand. They hadn't released anything for a while. They'd had a new film a couple of years before, and then interest in Winnie the Pooh slowly petered off. And they were trying to find ways of making that interesting for young mothers and young fathers and get them to re-engage with the brand, perhaps in the way that they had when they were children. And it was a very interesting project at the time. We got to use lots of new things that we knew at the time, like WebGL. So we had all these like 3D games that only worked on certain browsers back then. It's only a couple of years ago, but it feels like a really long time ago. And again, we art directed and built this interactive world of, it was essentially a map of the 100-acre wood, and you could drop yourself into any of these particular areas. So there was like Winnie the Pooh's house, there was Kanga's house, and all these little games and bits in between. It was really, we really pushed the boat out on what we wanted to do with it. And once you could get into these sort of 3D panoramas of the characters' houses, you could then go further into like deeper content, like care information, games to play with your children, that kind of thing. So it was meant to be this interactive hub for young mothers and fathers, young parents. It then led on to a much more interesting project as well, using a lot of new technologies. So this was a proof of concept that we were using to, we produced it in combination with Google. And what Google were trying to do is use their augmented reality technology at the time to sell that into other businesses as a marketing tool. So we got to expand on the work that we've done previously and try and bring that into a real world context. And we ended up building this game. It worked on a platform called Tango, which has been mothballed and replaced with AR Core, which I guess anyone's got an Android phone, you'll have that within your phone now. It's much more sophisticated than it was, but Tango had a very sophisticated piece of technology on the back. It was a camera array that built a 3D model of the room. Now, if anyone's used one of the new iPads that use LiDAR, there's something similar happening on the new Apple devices, but it's taken like 6 years for that to come into like a device that people actually have day to day or in their pockets. So this was great because it actually maps out the room and it could position things behind objects. Unfortunately, again, it was a proof of concept and it never went anywhere. But it was a really, really wonderful piece of work to work on. And with this project and also the Fantastic Beasts project, you know, as an agency, we were predominantly designers. We had account managers and we had some other people that worked in different disciplines. But the design was the core. So the 3D modeling that was done in this project, we didn't do it in-house. We worked with a company called Hot Knife, who were up on Mansfield Road. Great guys. And they really helps out with this. But when you work in a small agency, you have to wear a lot of different hats. You have to, do bits of illustration, you have to do bits of design, you have to do bits of production, you have to go and do account management. And I think from my time at Spitfire, what I loved compared to some of my friends that went to bigger agencies was the exposure to all the different bits of the business that I got. And that allowed me to progress much more quickly than, say, one of my friends who worked at a more traditional agency that was bigger, and they were stuck as a junior designer for quite a long time, only ever really seeing things within their role, not necessarily getting to progress beyond that until they hit certain points within the career or somebody moved on. So that is one of the benefits of working for a small agency. And also I'm showing these projects because, when I first started, we were 5 people in Nottingham, messing around in an old shop. And by the time I left, we'd worked for all these really big international clients. And they're still doing great work for big international clients now. But also, working for the smaller local clients tends to be where you get to do the nicer things, because you have a personal relationship with the brand or the people that are involved in it, and you can do things that seem, I don't know, they may not be as impressive, but they can often have more value to you personally. So this last project from Spitfire was something that we worked on as an internal project. Now, this was a series of films that I can't show anymore, but I do have these stills. And going back to what I said about Hot Knife, this project we worked with a company called Scene, who are up in Mapley Top. They're a photography studio and photographers. Rob and Karen are amazing. Great people. Like, we loved working with them. Worked with them all the time on most of our projects. They're really, really skilled. We also worked with Dimension 2. So Joe and Az, they're again lovely to work with, and they're a film production company that are based up there as well. And you see, this was just amazing to be able to build this sort of fully lit set and shoot things on it. And you can see how many people were involved in this. Like, it kind of boggles the mind now. Often when I'm working things like solo, like sometimes when you want to make something great, you do have to work with a big team. You can't always succeed with just 2 or 3 people. That doesn't mean you can't also make great work in a small team. You can. It just depends on the nature of that work. But yeah, miss a lot of these people. It's great. So what about now? Well, as I said, I work for Candide, and we want to help people grow successfully. We spent 2 years building up a social network. All my colleagues will hate this, but most people think of us as Instagram for plants. We copy a lot of Instagram's patterns to make it user-friendly for people, things that they know, much easier to understand and use. But also we do try other things. You can see something here that often a lot of people pick up on, which is there's a lot of different buttons on there. But something that, my gut instinct would be to simplify the UI for something like this, to help, to simplify the journey that the user goes through. But actually we ran an A/B test on the what we call the activity launcher at the top, which actually just makes all the things that are possible visible. And it encouraged user engagement, it encouraged user behavior, and it allowed people to find what they were looking for much more easily, because when you start curating what they can see, it's hidden away. So there's always a trade-off behind presenting a simple and beautiful experience, and also like trying to make it easy for people to access the things that they want to do. And you can see behind is our new website. We're currently pushing our marketplace and building that up. Our aim there is to connect anyone in the UK with small independent nurseries and growers who produce some of the best quality plants in the UK. But often they'll be locked away somewhere rurally. Most people won't know that they're there. So they're not particularly online businesses. So we want to give them a much bigger platform to sell the great things that they do in the UK. So I am actually a product designer. That's what I became when I moved to Candide. And for many people, I'm from a multidisciplinary background. A product designer to me is someone like Johnny Ive or Ray and Charles Eames, like someone who designs products that people use. Now, an industrial designer, I guess. I guess where most people think of me is I'm a digital product designer. So I use some of the same concepts, for building digital products. This distinction within the tech industry, if you go into the tech industry, everyone just refers to product designers. But once you're outside of the tech industry, the digital is a helpful, I guess, clarification. I've had a lot of toy designers apply for roles when we were using the tech language. So we've had to like change the language that we use to advertise things because, yeah, it doesn't quite, not everybody is part of the tech industry and knows the terminology. And we've kind of co-opted a term that has a, 50-year history of being used in another context. So really it's on us to clarify that. But product design works at the intersection of business strategy, user experience, and branding or visual design. And really what our aim is to do is to create something that's both useful for users and desirable. We're at the start of that journey with Candide. We're building out our design capacity to match our aims and all the things that we want to build. Up until this time last year, we only had 2 designers, even though we had 4 teams. So we're really ramping up our design capacity now to try and do that. But this creating something useful and desirable, you can sell products that people don't want, but they don't last. That you can also create perceived value on something through advertising. But if the value of that product is genuine, then any perceived value you add onto it is a multiplier. It means that you'll be much more successful than trying to sell something that people don't want. So that's really key for product designers to create things that people actually need and want to use. And it always brings me back to this much overused cliche quote from William Morris, but have nothing in your houses that you do not know to be beautiful or believe to be useful. Craft, usefulness, beauty are all important and they interplay with each other. They're not always distinct. Something can be functional and beautiful, something can be ornamented and beautiful. But, really what we want in our lives is things that help us do things better and bring beauty or joy into our lives. So that's something that, is really meaningful to hold on to. As a product designer, one of our main tools is Post-it notes, which is not anymore. Obviously, we've not been in the office, but there's a lot of Post-it notes here. I just thought you'd see that. But what we really want to get to the heart of is what are the problems facing our potential customers or users, and how can we come up with solutions to those? So design is a very broad discipline, but often in any context, whether it's visual design, product design, design thinking, it's about solving problems. The type of designer you are speaks to the way that you solve those problems. And as a product designer, some of the tools that we use to understand user needs are things like user interviews, quite basic, market research, I guess. I mean, 2 years ago, I was in San Francisco and Boston running focus groups to understand the differences between gardeners and houseplant lovers in America to the UK, because they have much more land over there, housing's different, people want different things. Yeah, it's a very different environment over there. So we had to go over and actually speak to people. So that's where user interviews come in. Card sorting is a tool where you try and understand the mental model that someone has for how they organize information. So it's really good for information hierarchy or understanding how you should organize things. Usability testing is just showing someone something and getting them to use it and watching them and seeing how they perform, where they struggle, and not so much asking them what their problems are, but actually observing how they struggle with the thing that you built. A/B testing is showing different users different things and seeing how they behave and how that affects behavior. Competitor analysis, which you will see like with market research in more traditional design roles. Wireframing, prototyping, and design sprints. I think design sprints are probably one to talk about quite a bit, because they are a specific tool that was created by Google Ventures. A company called AJ and Smart have reduced that down to a 4-day process. And really what you do in a design sprint is shortcut the design process. And it's really, really good for introducing design to people who maybe haven't been exposed to it before or don't understand what's involved. So that's, whether it's CEOs or account people or even engineers that haven't worked in a company that has a large design resource, and it gets everyone in a room talking about the same thing, trying to define what it is they're trying to achieve. And by the end of those 4 days, you end up with something that you can test with real users. It doesn't solve all your problems. Sometimes there is a lengthy design process to go through with lots of ideation and research, but it does help you make a start. And often when you're trying to achieve big things, making a start is better. Again, to go back to quotes and cliches, we shouldn't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And it's great to just get started. You can always iterate. Product design is an iterative process. And what we mean by that is you do something and you create a feedback loop where you release something, see how people respond to it, and then you quickly go back and change it and implement, make it better, and then release it, monitor, and you have this like feedback loop that just keeps going. So design sprints are a way of kicking that off. Just as an overview of the kind of tools that we use, we've recently all switched to Figma. I don't know if anyone's experienced it, but it's basically a connected version of Sketch. If you've used Sketch before, it's for designing UIs, but it's collaborative. So engineers can get in there. You can do mobbing design, which we've started doing, where everybody's like working on the same thing. Not always totally productive, but it can be quite fun. It's a great tool. And it allows, when you're working with the big digital products, you need to share assets, to have these design systems that can be updated and make sure that everybody's using the same assets. Miro is basically a replacement for Post-it notes. It's just a big canvas that you can drop stuff in, and it's really, really useful. I think with everything that's changed in the past year, there are a lot of non-design businesses that have been using this tool. Sorry, this sounds a bit like sales pitch, but it's not. It's just great. It makes things a lot easier. It makes collaborative work a lot easier. I use it for mood boards. I use it for mapping customer journeys. I use it for retro sessions where we, talk about what went well in the past 2 weeks and what went badly and how can we improve process. So it's really just a canvas that you can use, and you can actually have hundreds of people working on the same thing at the same time, same diagram. So interesting that way. And Creative Cloud, I've just dropped in there. Some of my colleagues do not even touch Adobe products anymore. They very rarely need to do that kind of thing. I work across disciplines, so I still do image editing. I still do some art direction, ideation, that kind of thing. So I still use Photoshop, sometimes use InDesign to do print executions, and I use Illustrator quite a lot. Trello, time management, organization. There are so many different alternatives to it. If you go into a big engineering tech firm, they'll probably use something called Jira, which is much more complex. But Trello is a really nice balance because people who aren't day-to-day working on technical tasks can dip into it, and it's not overwhelming, but also it's powerful enough that you can use it for quite complex things. And then usertesting.com for me has become a lifesaver over the past 6 months, because we always used to do our user testing in person. We haven't really been able to do that, obviously, considering the situation. And what usertesting.com allows us to do is not only bring in our own participants, users that we already speak to, but also source new people from across the UK so that we can talk to them, show them things, and just ask them or observe how they behave when they see them. So I've got a little bit of work just to round all this off from the kind of things that we produce at Candies. And I really wanted to show these two examples because on the right you have our pollination essay campaign and what became our campaign page that was used to encourage our users to post content as part of the campaign. And you can see the badge and the ring. If you posted with a hashtag and the campaign, that appeared on your profile. Compared with the one on the left, which is actually very, very simple. It's just a little notification for when you create a post. But actually how that came about was a very, very complex process, because behind the scenes, we had to build a whole new way of uploading content. And the one on the left was something I had to argue for. I had to take the user benefits and convince the other engineers and the product manager and the stakeholders on our team to actually persevere with it, because it was a lot of engineering time to build what we would call asynchronous upload. So the idea that when you send a post, this is something that's very basic on other social networks, but it hadn't been built for the MVP version of our app. But you can post, it uploads in the background, you can get on with other things, but also it lets you know when it's finished. And it was such a simple thing for the user, but it had all this, you know, tech debt behind it that we needed to build, needed to get through. So that was something I really had to persevere with to get. Whereas the pollination essay, it didn't really come from a user need. There was a business need there. The business need was engagement, user engagement, and to get the best value out of some money that was being spent on a campaign. And it's become quite a powerful feature because it was being built for the pollination essay campaign at the time. It was around the start of lockdown, and we were able to repurpose the functionality for the NHS, for a user-generated NHS Rainbow campaign, which not only engaged people within the UK, but also engaged our South African users. Now, they weren't thinking of NHS as our NHS, but they were thinking of it as the health service, the doctors that they have there with their system, and just to show their support. So we were able to do that and do it very quickly based on something else. So these are the needs that you have to balance as a product designer. There are needs that come down from the business, and there are needs that come up from the users, and you have to try and find a way to do the best for both. But we do still get to do other things. You can see my colleague Mackenzie here. We have a 1 day a month called a hack day. I don't know if anyone's had an opportunity to do that kind of thing, but it's where you stop thinking about what you're currently working on, maybe think about the problems that you've wanted to solve for a really long time but don't form part of your day-to-day work, and you just concentrate on it for a day and see where you can get to, sometimes collaborating with other people. So the example on the right was, February last year, all the quizzes that were going around on Instagram filters. I just spent the day seeing if I could build one, and we built a What Houseplants Are You one, and got it out. And that was just a really interesting project to do. We now know how to do that, and we could use it in other contexts going forwards. And then on the left-hand side, you have a print piece that I designed before Christmas. I worked with an illustrator called Charlotte Trounce. We have quite painterly digital watercolor style illustrations as part of our brand. And we've had those for quite a long time, and we're looking to evolve our brand and develop it over the coming year. So this was an opportunity to try new styles. And Charlotte does a lot of work with fashion brands and lifestyle boutiques and things like that. So we wanted to try something that was maybe a bit more contemporary, I guess, than the quite old-fashioned watercolors that we have. And this was a series of seed packets that we sent out, which ended up being an insane amount of work because we had to pack them all individually. I think we had to pack 2,400 seed packets because it was too small for us to get them done by someone else. But this got sent out to our partner gardens, and it is very successful at grabbing people's attention. I think when you do a print piece, print doesn't exist in the same way as it used to. But if you have the opportunity to create print, you should use sustainable materials, you should use high quality materials, you should do things that make it meaningful to have produced that piece, which we used woodstock, which is a Fedrigoni stock that's 100% post-consumer waste. And we only sent it out to people that we knew it would have a real impact on. And then hopefully this year we'll be growing something from it. So the last project that I want to show from Candide is something else that we've been working on. This was actually a side project. So Candide labels, we wanted to see how we could use augmented reality usefully. One of the problems with AR is that although in various guises it's been accessible for about the past 10 years, the technology is only just getting to a point where the things that people want to use it for are actually possible. But still, when you look at the App Store, I guess that one of the most successful AR apps is the IKEA Place app, where you can see what furniture is like in your house. And there are quite a lot of copycats of that kind of thing. There are industrial applications for AR, and then Pokemon Go, which is the most popular. But yeah, it's sort of been quite limited to games and very particular uses. So we were seeing if we could make use of it ourselves. And we had a little side project where we built this labeling app where we would use our plant identification technology, where you send us a picture, and we tell you what plant it is, or give you a good guess. Really, that's what we do, and bring that into a real world context. We built this small little app that wasn't particularly attractive, and then last year we really wanted to push it. We got a lot of interest from Apple. They wanted to promote it, so we were like, okay, this doesn't live up to the quality of UI and maybe like visual identity that we aspire to. So we sort of went back and rethought it, and with some developments within the AR core technology on Apple phones as well, we were able to use something called Core ML, which is where you can run machine learning models on the device. We were able to use that to automatically identify when you pointed it at a plant. So if anyone's got an iPhone, you can download this in the store. It's on hold at the minute. We're not developing this actively right now, so some things aren't quite finished off. But if you want to try it out yourself and you've got an iPhone, you can do it. But yeah, you can, if you turn on the switch, you can just scan around your room and it should identify any plants that you've got. It works best on houseplants. In fact, I think the automatic identification only works on houseplants because it really looks to see if there's a pot there. But it will work on outside plants and pots. But yeah, one of the things we spent a lot of time on this was getting the animation right on the dot that sort of follows when it's detected a plant, and the sparkles and the question marks that come out when it's identifying or like made a successful match. And then you can go on to look at what kind of care needs it has. And with it, these labels persist as well. So as long as your phone can match up your environment again, it will pop them back out over the plants. So you can sort of, instead of having all the plastic labels in your house, the hope is one day maybe we could replace them with this kind of thing. So yeah, that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for listening.
Brilliant, thank you, Nick. That was really like a great overview, and especially kind of that focus on what product design is and digital product design. Obviously, students at the moment are working with Figma. We've only had a couple of sessions on using Figma, and one of the questions that I had kind of prepared before, and I've seen a few questions have come through, is what do you think the most important things are to know about for UI and UX, that kind of term of UI, UX being interchangeable there. But for you, what are the most important things for someone to be aware of when starting out with this kind of software?
So I would say with UI and UX, they're distinct terms. So UX is user experience for anyone that doesn't know, and UI is user interface. So if you're in a bigger company, often these roles are actually quite separate from each other, especially in a more traditional tech company or you know, just a bigger enterprise level company. A UX person would sit and discover the user need and find the best way of trying to answer that and solve that problem. And often their deliverables would be a set of wireframes or you know, a set of questions to be posed. Whereas a UI designer is the person who would then take that work and give it form. So they would make it interesting, beautiful. Potentially they would also do micro interactions, that kind of thing, a bit of animation, and maybe build the prototypes that can then be tested with people. So there is a distinct separation. What a product designer does is bring those two things together. So you have to do elements of all these things. You know, as we grow as a team, I imagine we will get specific UXs that will work with us, and we will get specific UI people, because UI design is a craft in the same way that printmaking is. If you spend, you know, I'm a generalist designer, I work over multiple disciplines, but when you spread your attention in that way, you go wide, you don't go deep. So you don't necessarily build the skill sets that someone who does that every day would do. So if I was going back to doing some branding, I would, you know, probably do the art direction and things like that. But I would get in crafts people to do the rendering of the type or the icon and that kind of thing. When it comes to just playing around in Figma and getting started, I don't think it really matters too much. But there are lots of great resources out there. So if you can go into Medium and just search around for, there are lots of people writing about not only their own practice, but other people's. Spotify's got a brilliant design blog, so is Airbnb. And obviously these are product design companies, so that's the kind of stuff they talk about. Shopify has as well. And also, you know, some of the prototyping tools. So Framer, they often have loads of like interesting I guess, tutorials. And InVision have got a great blog that talks about the ins and outs of product design and UI and UX. Does that answer your question, or sort of went on?
Yeah, definitely. I think also it points people in the direction of where to look, because obviously Figma is a starting point, but there are these other platforms as well, so it's really useful to hear. One student, Daniel, has asked, how do you use qualitative and quantitative research to inform your design ideas in your practice? So obviously you've talked a lot about product design. Actually, a lot of it initially starts with user interaction and user profile testing. So if you wanted to talk a little bit more how that then informs what you end up designing, that would be great.
Okay, so I guess we've talked about quantitative data. For anyone that doesn't know, that's numbers. So it's seeing things at scale, how, you know, actually seeing what those numbers mean. So it could be something like running an A/B test where you provide two examples. The cohort of users gets split at 50% each way, and you see which one is more successful, and that gives you a number that you can go, oh, it's statistically significant that this version worked better for people. Where qualitative analysis comes in is the context. So that would be things like user interviews, surveys, because they only show you one side of the story. We don't, if we look at an A/B test, we don't know why that one was more successful. And the only way we can find out why it was more successful is, you know, sometimes it's delving into the numbers a little bit more, but other times it's just asking those users. And you have to be careful with qualitative analysis, because you can bias yourself. You know, if you talk to 5 people who are exactly the same and have the same viewpoint, that could lead you down a rabbit hole. But it's about having both together. I'm just trying to think. Currently, I'm working on what we call the product details page for the marketplace, and we want to know what kind of information do people look for when they're buying a plan. So we've interviewed people, and that will give us their, you know, their qualitative reasoning. And one thing that we did was run a card sort. We sent it to 30 people to see how they would rank the priority of different bits of information. And that gives us a matrix of like which are the most important bits of information. We can then combine that information with the things that people have told us in the interviews to come to some kind of decision on what we put in there. One thing that we've been missing out on our information was soil type, because we've been concentrating on houseplants for sales, and that's not really that important for houseplants, but now we're moving into much more outdoor plants, so soil type becomes more important. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, no, it does. I think you've really kind of outlined how qualitative and quantitative research, which is what students have to hear a lot about in their work that they're doing and at the start of projects, it actually really informs your product development and the way that you actually produce products. You're constantly using this iterative design process that you talk about, and it opens up different ways of feeding back on products and things like that. So I think that's to kind of summarize what you said. You mentioned when you worked with the illustrator that you used sustainable like paper when you were doing some of the design work here, and a student, Daniel, has asked what sustainable materials do you actually use? So do you have to kind of consider sustainable materials as a digital product designer, and if so, how do you consider them and what are they?
So I guess I'm not really sure what you mean by materials with that. I guess things that you might want to consider with your own personal values is like, where do you get your electricity from? I personally am working at home now and use bulb. It's all 100% green. But you know, I guess that was an example of where I did spec a particular material for a physical piece. Maybe thinking about the impact of the decisions that we make is probably because we don't really deal with materials. So within the digital realm, but I don't know if anyone's heard of NFTs, which is a big hot topic at the moment. Obviously, they're based on the blockchain, and I'm not going to get into Bitcoin stuff. I'm sure people on here know more about it than me. But what's happening at the minute is artists are using creating these things called NFTs, which are non-fungible tokens. They use something called proof of work, which takes an insane amount of energy to run, to make that work, and all for proving that you own a digital asset. now we have systems in place to prove these kind of things like copyright, and you can take people to court, things like that. It's not foolproof, and illustrators are constantly being scammed by larger companies. But I think something like NFTs, you would have to, as an artist, I think you should understand the impact of what you're doing, and it seems like that's a pretty clear-cut case for not using it, because the value that you get out of using that amount of energy is not worth the amount of energy that it takes. If that could overnight be transformed into free energy, then maybe that's better. But when most of our electricity grid is gas-fired and coal-fired power stations, I don't think it's I don't think it's the right course of action.
A brilliant answer, and especially in terms of it's a big question, especially in the world of digital product design. So that's really great. Thank you. Another student has said, what typeface did you use for your presentation, and why did you make that choice?
So it's Right Grotesque by a foundry called Pangram, and they're great because they do lots of very, I guess I would say, on-trend typefaces. Now, that kind of what that typeface has is it has the I would say exaggerated ink traps, which is, it's been around for a few years, but lots of people are doing that kind of stuff now. So that's why I picked it. It's kind of a bit on trend, and because I work within a brand, and that brand was decided before I started working for the company. It's very rare that I get in my day-to-day work to start playing with typefaces and that kind of thing. So I just wanted to use something a bit different. But with Pangram, you can download all their typefaces for $27. Now, if you want to use them in a commercial project, they would be very, very expensive. But as a student, you can get all their typefaces in a pack and use them in your projects, as long as you don't use them for commercial work if you're doing your freelance on the side.
Brilliant, cheers. And do you have anyone who you really go back to as a source of inspiration on a regular basis? So I know you had a quote from William Morris, was it, earlier on in your presentation, but is there people who often you find being constantly being inspired by?
So I've actually struggled with this recently because I guess when I was at uni, there was an uptick in sort of independent publications. So there was a big this is 10 years ago. So there was a big burst in sort of independent print publications. There were a lot of design blogs being set up. So, and ones that I still look at, It's Nice That or Visual, Brand New as well, if you're looking at branding stuff. Product design, if you go to the company blogs that I mentioned earlier, but also there's uxdesign.cc, and there's a few on Medium. But I used to use Twitter quite a lot. But one of the problems with these things is that they become a bit of an echo chamber. So everybody's seeing the same resources. And eventually, people don't like to talk about this, but design is often about novelty. And as designers, we are attracted to new things. If somebody's found a new way of expressing it, we are drawn towards it. And sometimes it's really hard to find that. So I don't know, if you want agencies that deal with product design, then Studio Koto, they do a lot of branding for product companies. They're sort of at the top of the game. If you're talking about advertising and inspiration, someone like Uncommon, they've just done the big B&Q ad, but they've done the Habito adverts as well. I don't know, people to follow on Twitter, maybe someone like Laura Mendonça, she's the head of product design at Bumble. There are interesting people around, but also sometimes product design as an industry is full of people talking at conferences and talking about process and not necessarily a lot of doing. And I'm very much, I like the doing and showing, not the talking about. So yeah.
Yeah, no, that's really good, and a lot of kind of sources for students to go and look at. If quite a few of our students are interested in digital product design, what would you think that employers would be looking for in terms of work to see in a portfolio? What kind of work or pieces should students be aiming to include in their portfolios of work if they were interested in going into digital product design?
So I guess something that shows that you've spoken to people, whether that would be, I don't know, I think when it's more traditional graphic design, you would always have, when I was at uni, you would always wanted to do market research, but that's quite scary to go out there and actually start talking to people. And it's not necessary for a lot of the stuff that you do, but within product design, actually talking to people about stuff is. So just even if it's with your family or friends, you can get them to use a product and see how they do it, so that you can talk about the process. To have like explored these things, it really depends on the kind of work that person does. I would not expect someone who's come straight out of a graphic design degree to have experienced all that stuff, because they're learning about the fundamentals of design, and then these are skills that are often taught in the workplace. But that does happen. People do expect a lot from graduates. But there are short courses that you can go on. If you look at Nielsen Norman, which is the usability, I guess the industry body, sort of, they've been talking about usability for a very, very long time, since the start of the web. And General Assembly is one to look into. But doing projects. So if you're doing D&AD life briefs and there's one from a product company, do that one and try and get some testing in there. There is a thing with, if you are applying to a job, maybe it's not always the best case to reimagine what they're doing, because they will have a lot of, some people will really, really respond to that, but also some product teams, they may not have. It's very easy to be like, oh, you should do this, but often that's devoid of any context. So what are the business constraints, what are the resource constraints, what is the world that this is actually being produced in? And often getting something done is far more important than anybody can have an idea, but if you can't produce that idea, it's not worth very much. And yeah, so sorry, a bit of a ramble, but
No, not at all. It's good advice. So another question I've got here: what's the best advice for completing a project with a short deadline?
I wish I knew. If someone finds out, I would say be honest with yourself. What can you achieve? And humans are notoriously bad at this. We tend to underestimate. I'm not sure what the statistics are, but from experience, things are going to take at least twice as long as you think they're going to take, because we don't account for things like other bits of work getting in the way, life getting in the way, but also we just think we can get things done more quickly than we can. So just be realistic about what you want to achieve. I think that's probably it. And don't be so hard on yourself. Like, if you make something that you're not particularly proud of, then use it to learn from and do better next time, and maybe plan out a bit better. Everything that we do moves us closer to where we want to be. So as long as you learn from it and do something with it. And also, even if you're not happy with it, don't be afraid of showing it, because if you can then show it to your tutors or to your classmates, then you'll get some honest feedback that may help you iterate on it and improve it.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice about just doing something rather than being crippled with self-doubt and doing nothing. It's better to give something a go and reflect on it than not do anything if you've got a short deadline. Obviously, you talked about in your career, you've worked both freelance and in-house in different companies. For you, how does working freelance compare to working for a company?
So I guess when I was working freelance, I was thrown into it sort of really early on in my career. I think freelance is hard. You have to run a business, and you have to be very comfortable with chasing people who won't pay you. It happens, like, sometimes bigger companies have like archaic finance systems. Sometimes things take time to come through, and the fact, most people need to be paid within 2 weeks. Most companies pay out in 30 to 90 days. And there's a big gulf between those two things. I would say that I wish I'd hired an accountant when I was freelance, because I probably paid more tax than I needed to. But also, doing a tax return is very simple. What you get from an accountant is they tell you what you can deduct. As a designer, there's not that much you can deduct, because you're giving a service, so it's your time that you're charging for. But things that you have to, like inspiration and resources, that kind of thing, you can. And also, I would get on an agency's books. I realized too late. I started doing that when I moved back to Leeds. I had like small jobs coming in that would kept me afloat. So if I hadn't have then moved back to Nottingham and gone back to a full-time role where I was at Spitfire, where I was freelancing before, I would have like stayed on those books and getting those jobs, maybe, rather than you know, going to like a full-time art working position or something. Or I think, yeah. But also it's hard to get on, it can be hard to get on an agency's books if you're a junior without much experience. So there is this terrible thing where you need experience to get a job. So I don't know. I've got if you've got friends that you can do projects for, that you help each other, that's a really good way if they're real, you know, commercial projects. Always, if it's an internship, get paid for it. I think it's a lot better in the industry than it was 10 years ago. People are more aware of the problems, but with not paying people for that kind of work. But I was very lucky at Spitfire. Like, I didn't have that much experience and they wanted to pay me a fair wage. And when you meet people like that, you sort of understand the value in it. And it's very easy as a student to be taken advantage by people in positions of power.
Brilliant. I've got a question come through from Dan. Would you say it's better to charge for a design at a set price or an hourly rate as a freelancer?
It depends on the type of work. I mean, anything with quoting, it is like, how much is a piece of string? You have to understand what the value of your time is. Now, with set price, what you can do and what most people do is quote over. So I would say anytime you've got a price that this may be terrible advice, but often when we work with budgets, we have something called contingency. So when you spec out a project, you would add on 20 to 25% because for unforeseen consequences. So that's always a good thing. If you're billing at a low rate, maybe add on 20% because you don't know what's going to come out with a set project, but also be very clear about what you're offering. So be very clear about the rounds of amends that they get. If they sign off a creative direction, they have to go with it or they have to pay you more money. So if they change their mind, but this can be very, very hard as a freelancer of any age to actually, you know, when you've got a company who are willing to pay for stuff, it's very easy to turn around and be like, oh, I'll just do that little bit of extra work. Now with an hourly rate, that can also work really well for projects, but it just depends, you know, how many hours do you think you're going to spend on it? Add 20% to that and see, because it may be that with the hourly rate, you may price yourself out. I don't know. It depends on your hourly rate. It depends on the job. It depends who the client is. There's so many variables. Just add on a bit more than you think.
I think that's really practical advice, like you say, because there's pros and cons to both having a set price and having an hourly rate. But that idea of quoting giving that 20 to 25%, that's great practical advice, because there's always going to be that thing around getting feedback from the client and making any revisions. Mm-hmm. I've got a few more questions come through. I've got one come through from Gabriella. I'm not completely sure if I understand this question myself, Gabriella, so I'll put it out to Nick and I'll see if it makes sense. But if not, another question has come through. Would you recommend work for exposure if it is initiated by you? I'm not too sure what you mean exactly by that, but Nick, do you want to try and answer that question?
So it's a complex topic. If you initiate the work and it's something that you want to do, and perhaps maybe it's for a good cause or something like that, or it's for someone that you want to support, then I think that is valid. If someone offers to pay you an exposure, block them or explain why you're not going to accept that job. I think I've worked on some quite high profile projects that haven't then necessarily gone anywhere. So the problem with exposure is it is not as valuable as people think it is. And also it's fleeting. If you miss the moment, if someone isn't there to have seen it, then it has little value. So I think if you're confident in the work, and you want to get that work out there, you wouldn't have any opportunity to do that work otherwise, and you have initiated it, then yes, it will be okay. But that's a lot of caveats. And I would say, try not to do work for exposure if possible, because it's someone trying to take advantage of you. unless it is a charity or something, I guess.
Yeah, Gabriella said that you've exactly answered her question, and that's what she means. So I think you've picked it up really well. Like if you're wanting to bring it, if you're wanting to show it and it's a self-initiated project that you see as important, then do it. But if someone's just wanting to pay with exposure, just don't even go there. And that's something we spoke about this morning as well. And a lot of people are talking about this. It's just exposure doesn't really pay. Another question is if you've produced work for a client, but you've done it in collaboration with someone else, how would you get paid for work like that, and what would be the process of billing?
Oh, wow. I don't know. I don't think I've ever. I mean, I would have been on the other side where I've commissioned someone. So it really depends on the setup of the project. So if someone's commissioned you to do the work, then they pay you. It shouldn't matter about them getting paid. You know, your contract is with them. I'm not an accountant. I'm not a financial advisor, and I'm not a solicitor. So you know, I can't give like legal or financial advice. But you know, the person that owes you the money is the person that's commissioned you to do the work. If it's a joint project, then you would bill together and split it. I think if I did it with a friend, like I would just bill singularly and then split that between us with whatever way we set that up. I'm sorry, I don't, because I've not worked in that specific context, I guess
I think
not
it's
got a
good.
great
I
answer.
think that's a good idea, and also maybe just thinking about answering it as well. Just having clear roles, being really clear. If you're collaborating with someone else, what are the roles, and maybe fix a payment to that role and what is required if you're thinking about the weighting of things. So I hope that's answered your question a bit, Gabriella. There's no more questions come through. I'll just give people a moment. Oh, there's one just coming through at the moment. I've not got any more written ones to cover because you've answered a lot of it. What new tech or trends should aspiring product designers be looking out for post-pandemic? Good question.
So I don't know, has everyone got invites to Clubhouse yet? I mean, it's kind of beyond me. I don't really understand it. I'm on there. I don't really want to listen to a lot of tech bros boasting about Bitcoin, but some people seem to. Clubhouse is an interesting one because people are so fed up of video calls. We're on a video call right now. I spend half my life in Google Meet, and it isn't the same as talking to someone in person. It's very nice right now to ring someone on the phone and have that kind of slightly, which has its own limitations, but that is a really nice thing to do. There's, I guess, within trends in tech, there's something about disposability. So there was a trend a year or two ago for, I don't want to sound like a trend forecasting agency or something, but you know, Gen Z, you're all Gen Z, I guess. But there was a trend on Instagram for deleting everything. So not things not persisting. You know, I'm of the generation where everything was on MySpace and Facebook, and there are some really embarrassing pictures which I did not put in the presentation. But that is actually ephemeral. Like things from MySpace have disappeared, but there's intentional ephemerality. So removing your presence and then recurating it and doing something different with it. That's something that's been around for a bit. There's a company called Dispo at the minute who's getting a lot of hype, and they're trying to recreate the original Instagram experience, and they're treating it like a disposable camera. So I think that's one sort of trend. Like, how do we create spontaneity, a disposable experience, living in the moment whilst having these digital experiences? You know, Snapchat did it a few years ago with things that disappear. Can that all just continue? I guess the other thing that we have in Candy is sort of like niche interests. The things that have been really popular for the past 10 years have been places where everyone is. So these are like the equivalent of the town square, or like the pub, I guess. These are public places where people go. That's what Facebook is, that's what Instagram is. And I think social networks are becoming closed, niche, to protect individuals, to protect privacy, but also because just talking about stuff without shared interests has little value to people. People want to connect over something rather than just connect for the sake of connecting. So I think that's something else. Is that, they're two quite broad trends, but I don't know if it was something more specific about technology.
No, it's saying very helpful, thank you. Another question's come through from Kim. Do we always have to keep up with controversies and update our work ethics, or is it only relevant if your portfolio /reputation/brand is public?
I'm not 100% sorry, sure how to answer that. I'm not used to talking this much. um, I think there are places where it impacts people's lives. So there are lots of, if you're talking about your portfolio, that depends on who you are approaching. Like, how do you want to be perceived? And I think there's always been a very sort of political strand within design, with where it's the first things first manifesto, or like there's these there is a sort of an sustainability and environmentalism, and often it's like at odds with what design is often in service to, which is commerce. And we see the same thing in the tech industry, where you have these big multinational companies that have sort of quite positive sounding, or like lots of initiatives for helping people, but the machine's not really changed behind it. So it depends who you're trying to appeal to. I think if you cynically latch yourself onto social trends, you're going to fall flat at some point. If you don't genuinely believe in it, or you're not prepared to do the work to understand why that's happening within society, then maybe you should stay away from it. But if you are, if you see something is happening within society, then leaning into it and understanding it and trying to help is fine. That's not cynical. That's what we should all try to do, I think. But also in your portfolio, it's about who you're presenting to.
What kind of work you want to make as well. If your work wants to address those kind of bigger social issues, you might find some bits of work do, and then other bits of work don't. But it's about probably having an awareness when it does of kind of some of the ethics around it is really important, rather than just creating work for the sake of it.
So this is really important within the tech sector, because inconsequential decisions taken 12 years ago by a college student have ended up impacting not only our political discourse, but the way that we behave. And part of that came about because things on the internet have historically been dismissed. Oh, it's not part of society, it's just internet stuff. It doesn't really matter that much. And we've seen that that's not the case, because the internet is an extension of the public realm. So if you go into, whether it's a large corporation or a public-facing company or a tech company, the decisions that you take that may seem inconsequential will have a direct impact on someone's life. And it's good to be mindful of that kind of stuff.
Definitely. Well, there's no more questions come through, Nick. So you've talked for quite a long time, and thank you. It's been really insightful. You've provided a really great overview kind of about product design, and also given us loads of practical insights. I found it really fascinating, and I'm sure the students have as well. It's been a really interesting session. So thank you for taking the time to be with us today. We really appreciate it, and I hope you've enjoyed it as much as we have.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was a different experience. I'm not used to this, but as well, if anyone does have any questions afterwards, I'm sure Lauren will pass them on to me if you want to know something else. Yeah, and thanks for listening to me today. I hope I didn't bore anyone.
No, you didn't, not at all. Yeah, thank you, Nick. And if you can just hold on for 5-10 minutes, we will just shoot off, but then I'll be coming back to you. So just hold on in there. Thanks everyone for attending, and they're all saying thank you and goodbye. Cheers, Nick. See you later.